So good evening, everyone, and welcome to Pure Lab Studios' inaugural webinar on climate change and sustainability. Thank you all for joining us today, and we're so honored to be able to host this event. We have people dialing in from Asia, Europe, and US, so this is definitely a global audience and a very encouraging sign. We got a fantastic lineup of panelists today, and my fellow Booth alum Brian will be moderating the session. A special shout out to my colleagues Miles and Alicia in Chicago for waking up extra early today to make this event. I think it's 6 a.m. over there now, and I hope you guys got your cup of coffee next to you. Both climate change and sustainability are some of the most important topics, and so we will continue to host our monthly webinar on these two topics from different perspectives with different insights. The goal is to raise awareness and community building. I would like to invite you to ask as many questions and put them into the chat group, and we will get to them during Q&A. So without further ado, sit back, relax. A very warm welcome to all of you. And now, Brian, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everybody for joining. My name is Brian Tsui. I'm an early stage VC investor that uses an impact-first framework to prioritize the companies that I work with, which doesn't make me an expert at all. Like many of you, I'm here to learn from the real experts, which are Andrew, Alicia, and Anisa. I think tonight's conversation is an important one because clearly SDG, ESG, impact ventures, impact investments, we are still at the early chapters of this long journey. For sure, there are a lot of headlines, a lot of talking, a lot of alarming statistics, but many of these frameworks are not standardized and not universal. So that's why I think it is very important for us to continue this conversation tonight, especially from an Asia perspective. And I recognize not everybody on the line now are investors or entrepreneurs, which is totally fine. But you are spending this evening with us because you care. And just because you care, I want to challenge everybody to think of one or two things that you would do differently when you go back to work tomorrow. What are the one or two things that you can do to contribute to this impact ecosystem? And I'm very confident that my panelists tonight will help you do just that. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anisa. Thank you, Alicia. I know just reading out your titles won't do you justice in explaining why you're so passionate about impact. So perhaps my first question for tonight is a self-introduction question for everybody, all three of you. Can you just tell us a bit more about your background and how it relates to impact, how it brings you to your current organization or the current projects that you're working on? What got you so passionate about it? Perhaps we can start with Andrew and then Anisa and maybe and then finally Alicia to close us out.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Jim, for inviting me here. First of all, I'm really not an expert at all. I'm just trying to figure out the same as everyone else. But basically, I live in the Philippines, and the Philippines is not a nice place to live. It's very polluted. It's a mess. It's filthy. It's not nice, right? So the only chance for us to change that, besides electing a better government, which is also not really an availability for us, is to try to find companies that will kind of make the change that we want to see. So for us, we really want to see companies that will help us reduce pollution, improve nutrition, and just like automate things that are really difficult to do. So basically that our companies just on the lookout for companies like that to invest in, because we feel that the more companies that can come to the Philippines and just help us make life better through their business models, the better the Philippines will be. So yeah, that's who I am and what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Anisa? Anisa, you want to tell us a bit more about your background and how it relates? I think you're on mute.
Can you see my slides?
We can.
Great, awesome. Sorry about that. I was on mute. My computer's a bit laggy. All right. So my name is Anisa. I'm from the UK, but I live in Singapore, and I run a social enterprise called Style Nomads. But I'm also a lecturer. So to give you a bit of background, because you asked me to give you a bit of background about how I got into sustainability. I'd always wanted to study fashion. I always wanted to work in the fashion industry from age 4, but having very conservative parents, they didn't allow me. Long story short, I ended up training with Marks and Spencer's as a buyer. Ended up running my own business in the UK, and was very lucky because I had family in Asia, in Hong Kong and China. So I was connected to factories there. And so I had a very successful fashion business, ended up consulting for Topshop, had clients all around Europe. And essentially I went to an event dragged by a friend called the Ethical Fashion Forum, because she was very concerned at the time, this is the 90s, about sustainability and the impact on the fashion industry. So for us in the fashion industry, we considered these people to be tree huggers, and I wasn't interested. But anyway, she dragged me along, and I heard some horrific statistics, which is 150,000 people per year die from pesticides and cotton, some of them in sub-Saharan Africa. And at the time, my brand was all about using African print. So my ears pricked up then. I actually ended up leaving the industry because the more I researched, the more I realized how much impact fashion has on the environment. So how did this social enterprise come about? I moved to Singapore, and essentially I saw an ad in a newspaper for a hackathon. And the topic was to help single moms to come up with an idea. I never heard of a hackathon, but I thought how interesting. This UK charity was in Singapore, organizing a hackathon about single moms. And I always had it in the back of my mind that if I ever went back into fashion, it would be to help communities. And so we went along, joined with a group of complete random strangers over the weekend. We put the idea together. And strangely, we won. We won the prize to start social enterprise. That's our origin story. There's 2 of us remaining, and what we do is train single mums very simply to make jewelry. Since 2020, we realized that actually there's need for meaningful work. So that's really important for us, that actually there are a lot of people who need work out there, not just single mums. We make quality jewelry pieces, and we've moved into lifestyle. So UN SDGs is a great framework. So these are some of the goals that we meet, which is no poverty and gender equality. The more research we did, the more we found that actually there's no poverty line in Singapore. And essentially women fall through that gap as a result. So that's our mission, is to really create jobs for as many women as possible. We also reduce consumption because we make great quality product, and we're slow fashion. So for anyone who's interested, and go back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and have a look, because they're a really great framework to help unpack some of that complexity around sustainability. So please follow us. We are Style Nomads. Comment, DM. We always love to hear from other people involved in sustainability. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Anisa. Last but not least, we have Alicia from Pew Lab.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm Alicia. I'm currently a student at UChicago studying political science. And I'm Canadian from Vancouver, but I grew up in Beijing. So when I was a kid, there was really bad air pollution. There was just this gray sort of mist called smog just over the city every day, especially in winter and sort of colder months. So every day when you go outside, you have to wear a mask. And the saying was that if you didn't, then you would basically have something like a 20% risk of getting lung cancer. So it was really, really bad, because obviously China is a rapidly developing country, and the impact of this on our lives were really clear. But then in 2008, I guess the government officials decided that they were just done with the situation. So they implemented 2 policies. So first was that some kind of rationing of cars. So basically every family had to sort of go through a lottery process to get a car ticket, and then you had to use this car ticket before you could purchase a car. So that lowered the amount of the growth of cars and the amount of cars on the roads immediately. And then the second policy was that only odd and even numbers could only drive on certain dates. And then based on the like final number or just I think letters on your license plate, you can also drive on different days. So even if you have a car, you can basically only drive on at most 2 or 3 days of the week. So that also made a huge difference. And then actually, I think in around 2015-ish, when I was in high school, there was like a huge difference. And then you can see that the weather and the air conditions was significantly getting better. So that really sort of, yeah. So yeah, that really made me realize that sometimes like a government policy is all it takes for climate change to be reversed, right? And even though like obviously many people were unhappy about that and it probably wasn't super good for the economy, especially the car industry, like this is what it took for Beijing to become clear, like to have clear skies again. So that's why I'm really interested and then hoping to study political science and then learn more about policy and then hopefully join the efforts in reversing or stopping at least climate change.
Sure. Thank you, Alicia. And I want to, Anisa and Alicia, I want to double click on your entrepreneurship journey because Style Nomads help single moms kind of create beautiful jewelries, and then Pew Lab uses peels, apple peels, and other fruit peels to create letters, right? When you build these businesses, do you have these SDG goals in mind? Can you help us understand that journey? And now that you have built that business, how are you measuring your performance on those SDG boxes?
You'd like me to go first?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so I outlined a few of the SDGs that we meet, which is 1, 5, 10, and 12. And I never remember, I have to keep looking at what they mean. But there's things like plastics, also reducing plastic. So they're a great guideline. When we started, we didn't have them in mind, actually. We just wanted to help single moms. And then looking at the UN SDGs, we realized, actually, this is what we're doing, and this is how we can get better. So we always keep a tab on how many single moms we train. We know we trained 50. That's really a drop in the ocean, isn't it? We also know that there's about 88,000 women in Singapore who might be, below the poverty gap. Let's double that. So that means we have we know the gap where there is for us to go. And as I said, we're looking into other things like life underwater, removing plastics from a supply chain. So we're using it as a goal. We're not promising to be a sustainable business. We are trying to bring in the SDGs as much as possible. And it's a learning process, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible and as open as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, so definitely the SDG goals, especially, for example, a few ones such as climate action and life on land are at the core of what we do at Peel Lab. Yeah. And in terms of measurement, we actually calculated how much carbon output, how much less carbon output there is for every like square meter of vegan leather that Peel Lab sells compared to just traditional leather, because that's how we just measure our impact. And then basically, if we can replace a lot of conventional products, such as, for example, car seats again, I'm talking about cars a lot today, but if we can replace that with our leather, or if we can replace backpacks with our leather, then there would be significant reductions in CO2 emissions.
It sounds like you're tracking that carbon footprint metric from day one, right? And do you use that metric to communicate with, I guess, not only investors, but also suppliers and other stakeholders in the ecosystem, right? Do you use that as a communication tool?
Yeah, definitely, because it's a great way for everyone to see our impact, and it's just quantifiable, so it's really clear and reliable.
Sure, great. I want to switch gear to Andrew. So Andrew, you represent the investor side. I'm very curious, how do you incorporate or consider impact in different stages of the investment process, right? So from due diligence to, from sourcing to due diligence to post-investment support, I guess I would love to learn more about how you incorporate impact in all these different stages.
Well, I guess from the initial stage, when we look for companies, we're looking for companies whose model somehow involves reducing pollution, right? So if the company's business isn't about that, then we don't even look at it. So that's really what drives us, right? It's all about pollution reduction, and yeah, so that's where we really begin from. Yeah.
Right. And do you use specific criteria? So when someone knocks on your door, Andrew, and say, I'm an impact startup, right, solving pollution problems, right? I guess what are some of the criteria that you use to evaluate that opportunity?
So I guess for us, it's very important that the business doesn't depend on like the goodwill or the conscience of the consumer.
Yeah.
Because we feel that if a consumer is patronizing this business solely for the good,
yeah,
right, then eventually that fades, right? Eventually that's like they'll get tired of it, or they'll go to whatever's more convenient or valuable. So for us, it's very important that the product is very competitive, very quality product that just so happens to be good for the environment. So I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah.
One of the companies we invested in takes coconut waste and turns it into coolers, right? So instead of styrofoam coolers, instead of plastic coolers, you can get coolers made out of used coconut waste, and that that reduces the amount of agricultural garbage, that improves the livelihood of farmers. But the thing about this cooler is that number one, it packs flat, right? So if you want to take it with you, you can pack it flat, and it's very easy to transport. The insulation is so it does a very good job of keeping things cool, and it's very stylish, right? If you look at it, it looks very, very cool. And so the story about where it comes from or the good it does for the environment, no one has to care about that in order to like the cooler, right? You can like the cooler even if you don't care about the earth. And I think that's kind of what we look for, right? Products that are great regardless of someone's environmental stance. Products that just so happen to be good, but who's, that's not the crux of why people buy it.
Yeah,
that's
I love that trash to cash thesis. I love that, and I think Andrew made a very good comment about impact investment. Right, it's not only about the SDG; it's also about financial performance too, and where you find a balance between that financial performance and also the social and environmental returns that your product creates, right? So I think it's very important for all the entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs want to be on the line to understand it is really that balance. That balance is extremely important. Thank you, Andrew. I want to go back to the two social entrepreneurs here. It's always difficult to be an entrepreneur. Do you feel like it's more difficult to be a social entrepreneur? Do you feel like you carry more burden of proof, having to tell your investors and stakeholders that this is the impact that we create? We do a lot of number crunching to track all these metrics. Do you feel like that is a burden? Generally speaking, I would love to hear from the two entrepreneurs. What are some of the challenges that you're facing in your respective ventures? Alicia, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's definitely many challenges. I think some investors just they hear like social entrepreneur, or just sort of anything related to like doing good for the climate, and they automatically assume that it's not going to be as profitable, and then they're not as interested. And we had this experience with speaking to investors before. So even though it's obviously like experiences like this are very discouraging, but there's also many sort of competitions and resources out there just specifically for social entrepreneurs. So I think like anything else, there's challenges and also I guess obstacles, but there's also many opportunities. So I don't think overall it would be a significant burden or more difficult compared to normal entrepreneurship, especially because everyone who we've spoken to who are supporting us are really passionate, and then it's sort of just this community that makes things a lot easier.
Great.
For us, we came from a kind of different angle because we were funded by the Arthur Guinness Fund, which comes from the big alcoholic beverage company, Guinness. So they gave us the money, we started. And yeah, we got the initial press and conversations and doors open because of the feel-good factor. But I think what Andrew says really resonates with me, which is it's got to benefit the consumer first. You know, otherwise, eventually they get bored of the nice story. So we face the same challenges as any other fashion business. It's extremely competitive. Some people are price sensitive, but conversely, the people, as Alicia said, some people who love the story or it resonates with them in terms of the sustainable impact really fall in love with the brand, and they always come back every Christmas. They want to support us, etc. But we do face the same business challenges, which is, you know, keeping up margins and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And do you feel like it's somewhat easier for you to get conversation, whether it is with customers or investors, with that doing good angle?
I think it opens the door, but then when they look into the numbers, it has to make sense. You know, it has to be proven. They've got to see you building the business over time, your cost margins, all that kind of stuff, profit margins, all those things. But you're right. I think it does, you know, intrigue people and it gets you through the door.
And from an entrepreneur standpoint, do you actually see the trend in the VC world that a lot of people are actually focusing more and more on impact, increasing their allocation, even though they are not fully or formally an impact investment fund? Do you see that trend? And in that sense, is it relatively easier for you to get a conversation with those so-called traditional VC?
From us, from Style Nomads, we really go for impact investors. Traditional VCs would not sort of, for the kind of amount of money that we started with or we're looking for, you know, your traditional VC would not entertain us.
Okay. What about Alicia? When you approach investors or fundraising in general, what are some of your tactics? Do you find it easy, difficult to approach traditional VCs, or like Anisa, you're primarily sticking with impact investors for now?
Yeah, we definitely want to talk to investors who share the same vision as us. So we mostly speak with investors, well, currently we're mostly speaking with investors who care about this issue and understand why we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, this has definitely also made things easier.
And what about the government's role? So we got a question in the chat, right? In terms of government support for social enterprises or impact ventures, do you feel like you've been getting enough support from your respective government? And perhaps Andrew can also jump in with your perspective too. So in the Philippines, do you feel like, you know, the government has been sort of doing enough to help you as an impact investor?
You know, I think the role of the government is really to kind of reflect the true cost of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really hard for social entrepreneurs is that they're competing against businesses whose costs are kind of socialized, meaning that when they pollute or when they, you know, when they do things, all of society kind of bears those costs, right? And the private company doesn't have to pay for it. I think it's the government's role to kind of equalize and really make the companies pay the true cost of running their business. But obviously in a poor country like the Philippines, the government isn't looking at what are the true costs of things. They're really just looking at, you know, dollar figures, right? But that's not enough. That's not the whole picture. And yeah, so that's really what the government should be doing, I think, and what the government is not doing in the Philippines.
Right. And I just want, Andrew, I just want to double click on that comment. So what would be the one or two things that you wish the government would do more in terms of raising awareness on impact investments, or in generally speaking, giving more opportunities or exposures to these impact startups?
Well, I think it would be really good for the government to like kind of impose like carbon taxes,
Yeah.
right? Taxes on single-use products, so that when social entrepreneurs are trying to sell their wares, they're not competing against things that are unfairly priced too cheaply, right? So if companies were made to pay for their single-use cleanup and stuff, I think that would level the playing field a lot more.
Yeah.
Same goes for like, carbon tax. If companies had to pay for the carbon that they emit, I think again that would really level the playing field for social entrepreneurs. And so I really think that that's how you get social entrepreneur to be more competitive, by showing what's the true cost of the alternatives, right? Because if you look at a cassava bag for like say five pesos versus a plastic bag for 1 peso,
yeah,
most people that's a no-brainer, right? I'll just do the 1 peso bag, but that doesn't reflect the true cost of all the cleanup that has to be done, and versus a cassava bag. So I feel like the government should really equalize that so that you get more apples to apples.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andrew. What about from your perspective, Anisa, as a social entrepreneur, what can government or the Singapore government do more to help you?
Good question. For us in Singapore, I think the government is really kind of ahead of the curve in the sense that they've got a government quango or organization, semi-government, called RAISE, which is there just for social enterprises. So you register with them and you essentially get all this information and support, access to investment. They have lots of conferences and talks, etc., which is excellent. And pre-pandemic, there was also a festival, again, which was all very affordable for social enterprises to take part and to raise awareness, most importantly, for this whole topic. So people are really kind of sensitized towards social enterprises in Singapore. I was quite amazed. But the only issue we face here, from what I know, is that you can't have a kind of formal incorporation as a social enterprise. Unlike in the UK, where governments recognize you're not a charity, but you're also not a business. So they give you the status, which then leads to some tax, if I can remember rightly, some tax relief, etc. So that might encourage people to start social enterprises, not just for the tax, obviously, but for doing good. It might also encourage investors to invest in social enterprises if there was maybe in a kind of official incorporation. That's just my opinion. It's not the opinion of my organization. So yeah, we've got some way to go, I think. But as somebody mentioned in the chat there, I think government policy is really important to sort of address these issues and to also gather data. I think Singapore does that really well. So they really gather data on waste and all the issues faced. I think there could be more to be done on that, gathering data, so that companies can really see their impact.
Right. And then speaking of that special status, do your investors care? You're talking to a lot of impact investors, and like Andrew said, they're mostly looking for a balance between financial and social environmental returns, right? So does that social enterprise status matters as much from your standpoint?
Yes, with impact investors, it does. That's the first question they ask. Some won't invest in for-profits, some will invest in for-profits. So that's really important. We have to establish that we are for-profit social enterprise, but all the profit goes back and is invested in the company.
Right. Okay. Wonderful. Alicia, do you want to you have any perspective to share here, like in terms of the government's role? How are they helping you, or how could they do better to help you?
Right. I think Andrew and Anisa already spoke a lot about how governments can better help us, but I think just to add on a little, in addition to helping social entrepreneurs, I think Andrew also mentioned this, I think it's important to sort of impose higher taxes or just make the cost of non-environmental friendly action higher, or even just make it impossible. So I think a common example that you guys may have heard multiple times already is just in the US, if you switch all of the light bulbs from normal light bulbs to energy efficient light bulbs, then you would save the emissions from 7 million cars a year, in addition to, I think, like millions of dollars. So I think it's definitely difficult to impose sort of strict regulations on people's households, but then on companies or sort of just public spaces, it could be a lot easier or more feasible. So I think just sort of regulations on smaller things like that could make a huge impact.
I can give, thank you, Alicia. I can give one example from Hong Kong. So today, actually, I finished judging at one of the competitions at the Hong Kong FinTech Week, and which is sponsored by the Hong Kong government. And the government actually added a new competition stream this year on ESG, right? So you can imagine there are the typical verticals like red tech, insure tech, and wealth tech, right? But they added a new category called ESG this year. So it's an example. Obviously, as an impact investor, I always want to see more of it, but that's an example from Hong Kong. So okay, so let's okay, so we got another question from the chat here. Do impact investors have higher returns than traditional VC? I have my perspective, but perhaps we should let Andrew speak first.
I really can't say because I guess it's hard for us to. It's really not clear, right? Especially when you look at what gets counted as ESG. You know, I mean, there's really not enough information, I think, to make a valid comparison.
Yeah.
But you know, but for sure, I feel like what isn't counted enough is enormous, like destructive impact a lot of current businesses have. And so, you know, it's just I think going back to that thing I was saying, right, where costs are socialized while profits are privatized. So I do know that non-ESG stuff for sure is very inflated, right? I can't say, you know, how ESG compares to normal businesses, but I can say that normal businesses are very inflated, that they're not as profitable as they seem to be if they had to take into account their true costs. So that's what I'll say.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. And perhaps I can add a bit here. So, so like Andrew said, you know, when we evaluate these impact opportunities, we don't expect to earn less. Okay, so like Anisa and Alicia, right? You know, when we, you know, look at you, like we're really trying to find the sort of the financial returns too, while we celebrate the social returns that you're creating, right? So point number one, you know, when we construct our portfolio or evaluate each opportunity, we don't expect to earn less, right? The criteria for getting impact investment is still very high, right? Point number two, fundamentally, I think Andrew and I would agree on this. We believe having good ESG practices internally would make you a more attractive investment, right? Because it helps investors de-risk, right? With good ESG practices, with your internal policy and the way you treat your employees, your community, you're actually increasing your valuation, right? You're helping us de-risk. And fundamentally, we do believe, right, having good ESG practices would make you a better company. And point number three is that you think about the millennial consumers, they want to associate themselves with brands that are doing good. So in that sense, you get, right, a better reputation, which typically translate into better sales by doing good, right, with your products and services. So that would be my comment. Any perspectives from Alicia or Anisa? What are you hearing from your investors in terms of the return requirements? Now, obviously, when investors look at you, they fully recognize you are a for-profit social enterprise, or what I call impact ventures, right? Can you share with us a little bit, like, what are you hearing from your investor conversations?
I can talk from a not so much investor perspective, but other sustainable businesses.
Sure.
And you know, a lot of research says, oh, you know, people are willing to, 20% of people will pay more 50% more, 20%, all these numbers, right? That they're willing to pay more for sustainable products. And it sounds great, doesn't it? But when you start digging into your costs, you realize actually you might pay a living wage and not a minimum wage. Your materials are going to be more costly. You've got to think about your carbon footprint. Maybe you'll make your products at home or source at home and not go to the cheapest neighboring country. And all of that makes the cost higher, which makes me suspect that, unfortunately, I don't think the profit margins are higher for VCs as a result, because the costs for a business that's thinking about all those externalities, not just going to the lowest cost, is higher. The cost of running a sustainable business is higher, not to the amount of trying to extract a higher retail price or service price, but those challenges are there. So I feel, from what I've heard from other social enterprises and sustainable businesses, it's getting the margins is tough.
Right. Anisa, what about from a hiring perspective? Can you comment on the hiring? With this kind of image, is it relatively easier for you to bring on sort of young employees or young volunteers, especially the millennials?
I don't know, should I say the truth or a lie? We have a lot of millennials and Gen Z who love the idea. They go, oh, I want to help, and then they disappear. And actually, our volunteers are much older than boomers. So yeah, so it's much easier to get volunteers from boomers who want to help and they support and they continue, as the millennials and Gen Z love the idea, but then don't turn up. Sorry to say.
Right. And how did that volunteering or hiring issue present itself during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, that was a challenge for us because most of the volunteering opportunities were in person. So we found different ways, like research and other things that could do online. But it's not as interesting for them, because I think what we learned is a lot of volunteers are doing it for themselves as much as the single moms that they're helping. They love the community and the time spent, which is hard to measure. Something we realize we need to get better at measuring, that human impact,
That would be another good impact to track and perhaps use that as a communication tool to engage your investors or stakeholders. Alicia, I want you to answer that hiring question from a sort of employee standpoint, right? So obviously you're attracted to Pure Labs mission. Can you tell us a bit more about like why you signed up for this and what gets you excited? And do you feel like people with your background, around your age, are generally excited about volunteering for or working for impact ventures or for-profit social enterprises?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I already spoke a lot about our measurable impact, and that was one thing that got me really excited and interested in working with Pure Labs. So I think, as Brian sort of already mentioned, a lot of more people of my generation are more interested in making a positive impact on the environment, or even just other things such as like other SDGs such as education or eliminating poverty. I think overall there's just greater awareness about these issues, as well as just a higher level of empathy and maybe more, I guess, because like changes in curriculum, and then as students also themselves generally get wealthier, they care more about these larger issues as well as their future. So definitely, I think people of my generation are more excited about things like Pure Lab with more measurable impact. And about the sort of investor standpoint, I sort of want to talk not about employees or just sort of hiring, but about
absolutely.
So there's this concept of corporate social responsibility, right? And it's sort of saying that like all corporates have this responsibility to act in environmental friendly manners. And this concept is really becoming very popular lately. But I think a really big problem with this is that if you look at corporates are actually very environmentally friendly. For example, if you look at Oatly, which makes oat milk instead of cow milk, and then or even just Tesla with their electric cars, they don't really make these things because they are environmental friendly, even though this is obviously something they're passionate about, but obviously because it's also very profitable, right? So they can only make these things after the sort of economic opportunity arises, not when there's like sort of just this concept of corporate social responsibility. So I think that's the part where we as consumers are really important. So if we sort of spread the word and then educate everyone about us and then around us and about us, and then just watch more documentaries and just talk more about these things, I think many more people will have sort of consumer preferences that are more environmental friendly. Yeah.
And how would you do that on campus, right? I think a lot of, right, because you're still in school and you talk about raising awareness, right? I think what are some of the easy wins or low hanging fruits that you can just do on campus to raise awareness for not only Pure Lab, but impact ventures in general?
Right, definitely. I think there's actually many groups on campus. There's specifically an impact investing group, and then there's many environmental friendly groups. And I think social media is a great way for these things. And also just at, like many public events, sometimes there's film screenings, and then you can sort of like suggest to play certain films, and just like things like that are actually pretty low effort, but they can really have a huge impact. Like I know personally for me, after watching a documentary about like organic farming, I started eating a lot less meat, even though I was a huge meat lover. And I thought like I would never become like a vegan type of person, and I'm still not, but definitely my red meat consumption has decreased because I personally feel like a sort of responsibility to not do that.
Yeah. Alicia, I'm curious, how would you respond to Anisa's comment earlier about millennial volunteers sort of come and go? I guess part of maybe it's about that loyalty angle, but perhaps there are a lot of other like issues, right? Because there's so many things competing for your mind share and time. How would you respond to that? And especially from a social entrepreneur standpoint, how do you retain those younger volunteers, the young generations? Especially we know they care, right? But I would love to hear from you. How do we retain them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm actually like, I don't have a really good answer, but I think just in general, younger people are excited about many things. So if you ask them, they'll always say yes, but then maybe they just might not be able to commit or might not have the time. I think if you just, I guess, try to engage them, and then obviously Anisa has been doing this for a long time, much longer time than I have, and has more experience than me. But I think sometimes it's just because people are too excited or just too ready to say yes, and then in reality they don't have the time.
Right. And Andrew, I want to, I have a question for you, right? So from an investor standpoint, when you do your due diligence, how much attention do you pay to these internal things, right? So for example, key employees turnover, volunteers turnover. Now obviously, I don't think this turnover issues is really unique to Pure Lab or Style Nomads, right? A lot of the NGOs, social enterprises, impact ventures that I work with are facing similar issues for sure, especially coming out like during the pandemic in the last year and a half, right? But Andrew, I would be interested to hear your thoughts when you look at these investment opportunities. To what degree do you sort of like pay attention to these internal operations aspects?
Well, I mean, it's all about the team, right? You can have a great idea, but if you don't have the team and the people backing it up, it's not worth anything. So you always have to look at the quality of the team, and obviously how the leadership is able to keep that team together and steer them in the right direction, right? If there's a lot of turnover on the team, what does that say about the leader, right? I mean, like no offense, Anisa, like I'm not saying anything about you because for sure people are like unreliable and they're not, like I feel like a lot every day there's a new someone's making a new case for robots, right? About like, oh, I can't wait for robots to get here. So people aren't like whatever. I mean, dealing with people is very hard. But you do want to make sure that there is a team there that's like all rowing in the same direction, that's able to stick together, and that will be able to ride out the obstacles and see everything through to kind of get to that goal, right? If that's not there, then obviously there's something missing, and you can't expect to reach that goal if people are changing all the time. So the team is very important.
Thanks, Andrew. And Andrew, how do you make sure your portfolio companies are actually creating impact as they said they would, right? Do you, is it just being more, I guess, just do a better job in due diligence, or you actually more hands-on after you made the investment? How do you make sure they're creating impact, especially as they grow, right? Because there are a lot of distractions that derail them from their original aspirations.
Well, I guess, like I said, right, that's what, like, their impact has to be part of that business model, right? So it's not like, like Alicia mentioned earlier, right? Like Oatly and Tesla, they're making an impact by virtue of selling their product, right? You can't divorce the impact from the business, right? The business is the impact, and that's really what we look for in terms of companies. Companies that just by virtue of selling their product or their services, they're making that impact. So you don't have to worry about, oh, well, are they still doing the impact? I mean, if they're doing the business, that's the impact.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way we look at it.
Great, thank you. And I just want to make a point to Anisa and Alicia, right? So when we say, hiring is very important, top management team is very important, I think, again, you know that already, but it's really not your specific problems. I think the entire industry is facing similar challenges. And from an investor standpoint, we're actually holding the sort of non-impact startups to the same standards, right? But in the chat, we got a very interesting question. Should we delete the word social, right? Social ventures, social enterprises, impact ventures. Should we delete the word social or impact when we recruit? Would that be easy? Any perspective from any of the three of you?
Yeah, I thought it was a really good point, really great question, actually. And there's a flip side, isn't there? If you add the word social, then immediately you have a certain type of person and maybe your values will align. And there's a challenge there. And in fact, I was just chatting with a colleague about this very topic. But if you remove the word social, then you might have all the dynamics of a kind of exciting tech startup, mightn't you? People who have come from corporate, you might attract somebody from the corporate environment who might bring something new to your company. But I think it comes down to the values are not aligning. If you're not there to just make money, you're there to make that impact. And if your values don't align, I feel that there's going to be a struggle along the way somewhere. So no, I don't think we should, but I think it's a really great question.
Thank you. Any perspectives from Alicia or Andrew? Should you take out social when you go recruit?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Anisa. It's really about the message you're trying to send.
Yeah.
It's all about the expectations. So you just want people to be on the same page as you, right? And if you're using that word, then at least the people that come to you are on that level. So it's really on the person and what they're looking for themselves.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I just want to add one comment there. I think it is important for these for-profit social enterprises or impact ventures to really dial up what's special about working for you, right? The good thing is, you're creating financial impact. You're also creating social and environmental impacts, right? I think that is your unique selling point. I feel like from a learning and development perspective, from an exposure perspective, from an excitement perspective, I don't feel like you're losing out at all to the so-called traditional startups, right? So whether you use the word social, that's a separate question. But I feel like when you go out recruiting, there's some beautiful story that you can tell to your potential employees or volunteers. So I guess closing question: if you have one advice or wish, a thing on your wish list that you think impact investors or impact entrepreneurs or the impact ecosystem can do, what would that one thing be? What would be the one advice or one thing that you advise them to? Should we start with Andrew?
I think I would say is to focus on the fact that people at the end of the day want what's convenient and want what's valuable, you know, what's easy on their pocket. And if you try to you know, if you try to ride on their feelings of caring about the environment and stuff, that's not sustainable, right? So if we're talking about like going for a sustainable business is one that is profitable, right? So you have to keep on being able to make those sales. And so if you're not delivering that to the customer, then you're not a sustainable business. So you really have to focus on delivering something that makes sense to the consumer, whether or not they care about the environment. Because, you know, like if you can do that, I think you'll really be able to make a lot of change. You know, I doubt most of Patagonia's, I mean, Patagonia obviously has a big following among environmentalists, right? But some of their biggest customers are investment banks in the States, right? And obviously those people don't really care about anything but money, but they love Patagonia swag, and you know, so you really have to make something that will appeal to people that don't have a conscience, because yeah, I find that a lot of people really don't. So
Great, thank you, Andrew. Alicia?
So going back to what I said, I think in terms of everyone in the community, just consumers, just sort of everyone talking to more people about these issues, and then getting more people on board, and then trying to change their preferences to more environmental friendly products. Not to say like forcing other people, but I think just like providing information about the true state of things. I think many people will automatically be incentivized to care. So I think just that will help change, obviously in a long term, will help change the sort of landscape of impact investing and startups as a whole.
Great, thank you. Anisa, you want to close us out?
Yeah, sure. I think it's both those things. I really agree with both Alicia and Andrew, which is got to make a great product which people want, but you also have to be an advocate for whatever change you're trying to seek. It's really important, but not in a way that's boring. You know, we've heard a lot of sustainability talk. There's a lot of greenwashing happening. I don't know if it's happening in your marketplaces, but definitely in Singapore, suddenly everyone's wanting, you know, saying how sustainable they are. So in a new, interesting way to show how the product can really benefit their life, as well as improve the environment. So definitely advocacy, but in an exciting, interesting way.
Great, very good. Speaking of being an advocate, I want to end this panel by reminding everybody the challenge that I gave you at the very beginning. I hope you all are excited and motivated enough to think about the 1 to 2 things that you can contribute to the impact ecosystem, either by mobilizing your knowledge, mobilizing your resources, or mobilizing your network. Right, with that, it's really a pleasure to be your moderator tonight. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to continue this conversation in future events. Thank you. Back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Brian. That was a great discussion. And thank you to our speakers tonight. I definitely, I hope you guys all enjoyed the discussion and learned a thing or two. I personally definitely have picked up a few myself, you know, through some of the questions that I have asked. And obviously, I also learned that Hong Kong FinTech Week now has a ESG track, which is great news for all of us here. So yeah, start spreading the gospel. Mobilize your knowledge and your resources, and that's what we're doing here. To raise awareness and community building. So thank you. Please look out for announcements on our next webinar. And for anyone who would like to put words into action, like to be involved, participate with what we're doing, please get in touch with any of us at Peel Lab. Thank you again for joining today. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.